I've been having a great time playing Hades 2 since it released in early access a couple weeks ago. Hades 2, at its core, feels like more Hades. If you enjoyed Hades 1, you're probably also going to enjoy Hades 2. The game structure is similar, but there are some important differences between them, and there are also some areas in Hades 2 that feel unfinished because it's early access. Because of that, I want to compare these two games in 4 main areas: combat, builds, progression, and the current amount of content in the game. With all of that, we'll decide whether you should pick up Hades 2 right now. So let's get into it. The biggest immediate change in Hades 2 comes in the form of the character that you're playing, Melanoi instead of Zagreus. Her moveset hits on similar notes, having 2 attack types and a cast. But her moves feel very different, and the way the cast works is also very different, with it being a circle AoE in Hades 2. Additionally, the game adds Omega moves, which are charged up, more powerful versions of your 3 moves to give them more powerful effects at the cost of some mana. You have a familiar dash in Hades 2, but you can't double dash. Instead, you're given a sprint, which allows you to keep running after a dash for increased movement speed. All these together give Hades 2 a different combat feel than the first game. While Hades 1 shines with melee attacks and spamming dashes, Hades 2 is just a tiny bit slower and a little more deliberate. You have to pause and think sometimes about whether you're able to charge up a more powerful Omega attack or whether it's not worth it. You have to time your dodges more deliberately because you can't just spam them. And range damage can feel a lot better in Hades 2 than the first game, especially because with effectively 4 unique moves per weapon, all weapons have at least some good range damage. This new moveset also fits the theme of the game as more magic focused and witchcrafty. There are also a lot of people that didn't like the sprint in this game at first, but I actually enjoyed it. I think it does a good job of giving Mel a different feel than Zagreus. And it also opens up new interactions and builds with that sprint instead of that dash. It could still use some tweaking, but they updated it with the patch already, which made it feel a lot better. In terms of combat on the enemy side, the game has completely new areas with new enemies to go along with them. So there's a whole new set of moves and attacks to learn. Like the first game, Hades 2 has elite enemy variants, mini bosses in each area, and larger final area bosses with some cross-run variation. Now let's talk about builds. The overall build crafting in Hades 2 feels overall similar to Hades 1. The biggest immediate change is that boons now affect sprint instead of dash. Hades 2 brings back some familiar gods from the first game, like Zeus and Poseidon, but expands the pantheon as well with some new ones, like Apollo and Hera. However, even the gods that are returning offer slightly different boons or condition effects, such as Zeus, whose boons now apply Jolt, a condition effect that deals more damage to enemies after you hit a certain damage threshold. Calls are also removed from Hades 2 and are replaced with more powerful abilities from Selene, the moon goddess, which are charged up by mana usage. Unlike calls, these abilities can be upgraded by getting Selene boons again and leveling up a skill tree that gives them a little more flexibility. Builds in Hades 2 definitely feel distinct because of all these changes. Almost entirely new boons, a new system replacing casts, fully new weapons with new aspects or variants, and the return of the hammer, creating even more variants run to run. And while duo boons still exist, the game adds another access to build crafting in the form of elements. Each boon has an element assigned to it, and there are new boons that synergize with those elements to create more powerful effects. This basically just adds a new way to synergize between gods that aren't those predefined existing duo boons. Overall, the elements are a nice additional change. And more than just adding new boons and new boon types, the boons also interact with your moveset differently in Hades 1 than Hades 2. Most notably, because now you have both basic or regular attacks and Omega, more powerful attacks, you have essentially 6 different attacks instead of 3. As a result, there are now a lot more niche boons for builds that might only affect Omega moves and not the regular version. For example, one boon might make your Omega attack deal more damage, but leave your regular attack unchanged. The addition of more moves, more specific and more niche boons, boon elements, as well as mana management all change how build crafting feels. It's a bit of a double-edged sword though. In some ways, I love this new build crafting system. There are more build crafting strategies, more fun ways to combo, and more ways to feel like you're creating those truly overpowered, busted builds in a way that's a lot harder in Hades 1, which is often criticized for being more tame and more on the rails with its build crafting. At the same time, Hades 2 suffers from a greater reliance on RNG and has an increased number of boons that are useless or actively bad for certain builds that you might be running. For example, there are now both general attack boons and omega attack boons, so you're statistically less likely to get a good basic attack boon in Hades 2 than compared to Hades 1. There's just more options to pull from. And I had one run where I got to the final boss without a decent general basic attack boon. Some boons, for example, prime mana, meaning they lock your ability to use some of your mana pool in exchange for a new effect. If you take one of those boons by accident, you can completely ruin an omega attack based build if you don't have any mana to use omega attacks anymore. On the net, I still like this new build crafting. It just feels more fluid, more customizable, and just more fun to experiment with. But it does also bring in some more frustration points for players in regards to build crafting in a way that does not exist in Hades 1. Even more so than build crafting, the progression in Hades 2 feels distinct from Hades 1. In Hades 1, progression involves maybe 6 currencies or resources that all have clearly delineated roles and things they unlock. Darkness upgrades the mirror, which buffs Zagreus, gems allow you to buy House of Hades upgrades, and Titan's Blood is used to unlock more weapon aspects and level them up. It's very obvious what you need to collect in order to progress each of these areas. Hades 2, on the other hand, has a lot more complicated system, mostly because there are a lot more different currencies and resources and a lot of different ways to collect them. In some ways, Hades 2 has the same systems as Hades 1. There's an equivalent to the mirror in the form of Arcana cards, there's an equivalent to the House of Hades in the form of incantations, and there's an equivalent to the armory as well that manages your weapons. But these systems are all much less straightforward in Hades 2. Let's take the Arcana cards, for example. Unlike the mirror, where you can have every upgrade or its variant unlocked when you buy it, Arcana cards have to be both unlocked and also equipped. And the number of cards you can equip is limited by your grass level in the tier of each card. Unlocking Arcana cards requires ashes, while leveling up your grass level requires grasp. A little more complicated than the mirror, but also still manageable. But then, 2 more complications come in. First, some of the later Arcana cards require more than just ashes to actually unlock, usually also requiring a currency that drops from a certain boss, with each boss having their own resource. Second, each Arcana card can be upgraded, and that requires another unique resource in the form of moon dust, if not also additional boss resources that I just talked about. And this isn't even getting into incantations, which also require unique resources and also give unique resources. There's also farming, unique currency you can use at a between run merchant, and more unique resources for progressing relationships and doing that. What all of this means is that Hades 2 has a lot more resource management than Hades 1. You also select a resource gathering tool for each run that gives you more of that resource along the way, like bringing a pickaxe, allowing you to get more ore on future runs. Originally, bringing that pickaxe would be the only way to get ore on runs, but you can now collect all resources on all runs. I actually enjoyed this more complicated progression system. I think it gives fun short goals to aim for, and also makes you think more deliberately about what you want to prioritize, both with the resources you have, but also what resources you want to aim for on future runs. But it does make your time between runs a lot longer, because you're playing around with that progression before hopping back in. And like its predecessor, Hades 2 has both a lot of progression and also strong vertical progression, such that a maxed out account and a fresh save file will feel very different in terms of their power level and gameplay variety. This system also encouraged you to do runs down each of the 2 paths, and that brings us to our final comparison point, the amount of content that currently exists in Hades 2. Comparing Hades 1 to Hades 2 content-wise is funny, because Hades 2 already has more content than Hades 1. That's both confirmed by the developers, and you can see it yourself when you play the game. But it's also very clearly incomplete. If I had to guess, I would say Hades 2 is at 70 to 80% complete, with some areas feeling more complete than others. A lot of the core gameplay feels pretty complete. There's already good boon variety, the same keepsake system from Hades 1, the progression feels very fleshed out, as I just talked about, relationships with NPCs are already great, and the developers have confirmed that Hades 2 has more voice lines than Hades 1 already. Other things feel more incomplete. There's a good number of weapons and variants, but there's still fewer than in Hades 1. There are a lot of items and several NPCs that still have placeholder icons or drawings. And finally, the biggest addition to Hades 2 over Hades 1 comes in the form of a second run path. You start off only being able to go down and fight the first final boss, but eventually you unlock the ability to go on a second type of run in new areas with new enemies and unique bosses. It's honestly great to have both these run paths in the same game. It helps with that gameplay variety. But while that downwards path is basically complete gameplay wise, the other path is only half finished. It has 2 areas out of what will presumably be 4 areas at final release. Additionally, all of the story content for that downward path is not currently present. When you beat that final boss for the first time, it hints at very clear story beats that are just not in the game yet. So there is more gameplay in Hades 2 than Hades 1. It's a run and a half in Hades 2 as opposed to just one run in Hades 1. But it's also clearly not done, and after winning a couple times, I decided to pause playing the game for now in order to experience that full, complete story when it comes out. So let's close out this comparison. I think I first want to say that if you did not enjoy Hades 1, Hades 2 probably won't change that, with one exception. The different build crafting and the increased enemy and area variety in Hades 2 might entice people whose main complaint with Hades 1 was that lack of variety in the more simplified build crafting system. But otherwise, Hades 2 is ultimately just more Hades. So should you grab Hades 2 right now if you loved Hades 1? If you loved Hades first and foremost for the art, the music, and the character relationships, all those things feel great right now in Hades 2. The gameplay does feel different, with a marginally slower, more ranged-based, magical feel, but it still feels very Hades, and if you're a Hades 1 veteran, you'll get used to it pretty quickly. So if you played Hades 1 for the gameplay first and foremost, I think it's also worth grabbing Hades 2 right now. There's already more gameplay content in Hades 2 than there was in Hades 1. There's new attacks, new combos, and new build crafting strategies that will just all feel fresh. The game also runs great on Steam Deck if you're looking for that. The main reasons to not grab Hades 2 right now, in my opinion, are 3 things. First, the early access version is only on PC. So if you're a console gamer, you can't play it right now anyways. Second, while some of the story and most of the NPC relationships and dialogue are present, the main story conclusion is not. If you played Hades 1, not just for the interpersonal relationships, but also for that overarching story, it might be worth waiting until that 1.0 full release. That's the reason why, after I've had this first couple fun weeks with it, I'm planning to put this game down until its 1.0 full release, be able to experience that full story in its entirety. Finally, the second run path is currently incomplete. This didn't frustrate me at all because, again, there's already more content gameplay-wise in Hades 2 than in Hades 1, but if you would hate that feeling of not being able to truly win the game yet, then it's probably best to wait for now as they complete that second run path. Let me know what you think about this different video style from me, and I'll have my standard roguelite review out for Hades 2 when the game releases into 1.0. Huge shout out to all of our channel members for helping support the channel. Please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and thanks for watching.